Emily Carter pressed her palm against the gleaming glass door of Magnolia Grill, one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Dallas. The sharp contrast between the cool evening air and the warm luxury inside pressed harder against her than the glass itself. She shifted uncomfortably, adjusting the oversized coat that barely hid her swollen belly. With a timid knock, she tried again, her fingertips barely making a sound against the expensive finish. Inside, laughter and the soft clink of crystal glasses filled the air. At a prime table near the window, Derek Cole, immaculately dressed in a custom navy suit, leaned back with effortless arrogance. Vanessa Moore, perched elegantly across from him in a red silk dress, tilted her head back and laughed, her diamond earrings catching the light. A waiter whispered discreetly in Derek's ear, pointing toward the glass doors. Derek barely turned his head. He simply lifted 2 fingers with a flick, an unspoken order to ignore. A few other diners glanced toward the entrance. Whispers started, some curious, others dismissive, but no one made a move. Emily's eyes scanned the room helplessly, but all she found were turned faces and lowered gazes. Across the bustling street, Luis Martinez, a young janitor on his dinner break, leaned against a lamppost near the valet station. His uniform was wrinkled, his work boots scuffed, and in one hand, he clutched a half-empty plastic water bottle. As he took a slow sip, his eyes locked onto Emily's desperate figure framed against the grandeur of the restaurant. Emily rapped, her arms around herself as the soft autumn wind picked up. She looked down at her worn sneakers, feeling smaller with every second. Carefully, she lowered herself onto the edge of the curb, sitting heavily, one hand protectively on her belly, the other brushing a tear off her cheek as if she could wipe away the shame with it. Luis hesitated, his hand frozen halfway to his pocket where a few spare bills sat crumpled. He stepped forward, then stopped himself. Across Dallas, people moved quickly, pretending not to see, letting the world rush past without slowing down. He looked away, ashamed of his own hesitation. Inside the restaurant, Vanessa leaned in closer to Derek, murmuring something with a sly smile. Derek grinned, lifting his glass in a mock salute toward the door without even looking at Emily. Their champagne flutes clinked softly as they toasted to whatever private joke they shared. A valet in a crisp black uniform cleared his throat awkwardly, nearby, signaling that new customers were arriving. Emily quickly tried to stand, struggling slightly with the weight of her pregnancy. She placed one foot firmly on the sidewalk, pushing herself up, only to stumble back slightly as her balance wavered. No one moved to help. Moments later, the restaurant manager, wearing an expensive tailored suit and an even colder expression, stepped outside. He adjusted his cufflinks and plastered on a fake smile for the new guests stepping out of a sleek black town car. Then, his smile vanished as he turned to Emily. "Ma'am," he said sharply, keeping his voice low but firm. "You're disturbing our guests. I'll have to ask you to leave immediately." Emily opened her mouth, maybe to explain, maybe just to plead, but no sound came out. Her cheeks burned as she nodded silently. She gripped her coat tighter around her body and slowly backed away, one trembling hand smoothing her hair back in a useless gesture of dignity. Inside, Derek and Vanessa turned their attention back to their entrees, unmoved by the small drama outside. Through the polished glass, they looked like royalty in their castle, while Emily stumbled away into the noisy Dallas night, disappearing into the sea of headlights and blurred reflections. Luis watched her until she was swallowed by the crowd. His chest tightened, but he stayed where he was, the half-empty bottle of water growing heavier in his hand. Emily stepped into the shadow of a closed souvenir shop down the block, the bright lights of the restaurant still stinging at her back, like a wound that refused to close. She fumbled with her cracked phone, fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. Derek's name glared back at her, a lifeline she hated needing but couldn't afford to lose. Pressing the call button, she lifted the phone to her ear, one hand gripping the folds of her coat tight across her chest. The line rang twice, and for a moment, she dared to hope he might pick up. Instead, the ringing stopped abruptly, replaced by a curt automated message. "This number is no longer accepting calls from your number." She stared at the screen, stunned, as the words sank in. He had blocked her. Not tomorrow, not later. Right now, while she was still standing outside the very place he laughed in. Behind the thick restaurant windows, Derek clinked his glass against Vanessa's with a smug smile. On Vanessa's phone, a short video played back. Emily's hunched figure, barely visible through the glass, shivering and awkward under the harsh neon sign. Vanessa smirked, typed a quick caption, "Cheers to freedom," and hit post. Within seconds, her story was live, and a handful of notifications buzzed through as their circle of friends started reacting. Emily wandered down the block, passing couples who barely noticed her existence. Her throat ached, parched and raw, but she pressed on, head bowed. Somewhere in the crowd, a few teenagers snickered as they stared at their phones. One of them nudged another, showing him Vanessa's post. The blurry image of a woman, obviously, pregnant and slumped against a restaurant wall, flashed across the screen. The comments rolled in fast. "Dallas really got some crazy people these days. Is that real? Thought it was a prank. She should have stayed home instead of embarrassing." Herself, no one paused to ask who she was. No one cared. Across the street, in the underground parking garage, Luis wiped his forehead with the sleeve of his uniform as he leaned against a concrete pillar for a quick break. His phone buzzed with an alert, and he opened it absent-mindedly. Scrolling past memes and updates, his thumb froze mid-scroll. There she was. The same woman from earlier, captured awkwardly in a badly lit photo, posted like a joke. He stared at the screen, feeling the bitter taste of anger rising in his throat. He recognized the sadness in her posture instantly, the silent plea she hadn't spoken but wore all over her body. Luis shoved the phone back into his pocket, his break forgotten, but his shift wasn't over. He cursed under his breath and kicked a pebble across the cracked floor. Across Dallas, the night buzzed with life, laughter, and indifference, and somewhere in that chaos, a woman was drowning unseen. Emily shuffled along the sidewalk, one hand braced against her back for support. A pharmacy came into view ahead, the neon closed sign flickering weakly in the window. She tried the door anyway, rattling the handle, but it didn't budge. Her heart sank. She fumbled in her pocket, pulling out a few crumpled dollar bills, the last of what she had. Through the glass, she could see bottles of water stacked neatly behind the counter, just out of reach, sparkling like a cruel joke. She knocked lightly at first, then harder, but there was no answer. A security camera mounted above the door blinked, silently, recording but offering no help. Emily pressed her forehead against the glass, her breath fogging the surface as her knees buckled slightly. She turned away, trying to steady herself. A couple passing by cast a glance at her but hurried on. A man leaned against a street lamp nearby, pulling out his phone. He tilted it, angling it toward Emily, recording. She didn't see him. She stumbled, a few steps forward, the world tilting around her. Her fingers loosened their grip on the coat. Her legs gave out. Emily collapsed onto the cold concrete, her body curling instinctively to protect her unborn child. Her purse spilled beside her, coins rolling out into the gutter. The man with the phone kept recording. A few more people paused at a distance, curious but cautious, none willing to step closer. Luis, stacking cones in the garage, heard the commotion faintly through the street entrance. He looked up, heart hammering, feeling the pull of something he couldn't ignore much longer. He threw the cones down and jogged toward the sound, weaving between parked cars as the echoes of the city swallowed him whole. The blinding white lights of the emergency room flickered overhead as Emily blinked herself awake. The harsh scent of antiseptic filled her nose. A worn blanket was pulled up to her chest, and the dull beeping of a heart monitor tapped against the heavy silence around her. For a moment, she just stared at the cracks in the ceiling, feeling the pounding ache in her head match the hollow in her chest. She turned her head slowly toward the side table. A thin stack of papers clipped together waited there, and in bold, black letters at the top of the first page she read, "No emergency contact." She swallowed hard. The room was otherwise empty. No visitors, no flowers, no familiar faces. Just a folded hospital gown on a chair, a plastic pitcher of stale water half empty beside it, and the feeling that somewhere along the way, even the universe had given up on her. The door creaked open, and for a brief second, Emily's heart lurched. But it wasn't Derek or anyone she knew. A hospital worker in a gray uniform entered, carrying a clipboard and a delivery envelope. He glanced at her, didn't smile, and clipped the envelope onto the bed rail. Without a word, he turned and left. Emily stared at it warily. The return label bore the mark of a private courier service, and in small, neat print, Cole Enterprises Legal Department. With trembling fingers, she peeled the seal open. Inside was a packet of cold, impersonal papers, divorce documents, property transfer agreements, disclaimers. Everything neatly arranged to ensure that what little security she had left, the house, the cars, the bank accounts, would now officially belong to Derek. A yellow sticky note, in handwriting she didn't recognize, simply said, "Sign where highlighted." The betrayal settled over her like a second skin. No explanation, no apology. Just business, just abandonment, delivered straight to her hospital bed while she lay hooked to machines and breathing recycled air. Across the hallway, Luis pushed, a cart stacked with cleaning supplies and disinfectant bottles. He moved quietly, used to being invisible in places like this. But as he passed Emily's room, he caught a glimpse through the open door. The same girl from outside the Dallas restaurant, now lying pale and broken under fluorescent lights. He slowed down. His supervisor's voice echoed faintly from the other end of the hall, calling him to hurry up, but Luis didn't move. Instead, he rummaged through his cart, pulling out a small paper bag he had picked up during his break, a turkey sandwich, and a bottled water, leftovers from a rushed meal he no longer had the appetite to finish. He glanced down the hall once, then stepped lightly into the room. Emily had her face turned toward the window, her shoulders stiff, the legal papers clenched tight in her lap. Without saying a word, Luis placed the sandwich and water gently on the side table, next to the stale pitcher. His movements were careful, almost reverent, as if trying not to disturb something sacred. He backed out quickly, disappearing down the corridor before she could turn and see him. Emily shifted slightly, noticing the new items beside her. She looked around, confused. No nurses, no doctors. Just the sandwich sitting there, unassuming and quietly kind, in a world that had offered her nothing but coldness lately. Her fingers hovered over the water bottle for a long moment before she finally uncapped it and took a slow, cautious sip. Later that afternoon, a nurse bustled into the room with a tablet and a tired smile. "We need you to review your intake papers, honey," she said, tapping the screen absent-mindedly. She slid a slim manila envelope onto the side table, distracted by an incoming call on her headset. "Oh, almost forgot. This came with your stuff. Guess it got left in your bag." Emily blinked at the envelope. It was old, the corners slightly dog-eared, with her name hastily scrawled across the front. The handwriting wasn't Derek's. Curious but wary, she tore it open carefully. Inside was a letter, one she hadn't seen before. It was a communication from Derek's former attorney, dated nearly a year ago, discussing asset shielding options and mentioning offshore accounts in Belize and Cyprus. Attached was a list of properties, condos, investments, vehicles, all bought secretly under shell company names. Her heart pounded. She skimmed the details, her breath catching as she realized the scale of it. Derek had been hiding money, preparing to cut her out long before the public betrayals ever began. The letter wasn't meant for her. It must have been accidentally stuffed into her bag when Derek's team packed up whatever they didn't want to deal with anymore. A shaky laugh escaped her lips, half in disbelief, half in a simmering anger that began to rise inside her like a fire catching wind. Across the hallway, Luis watched discreetly from his cart, sensing without knowing that something inside the girl in that hospital bed had shifted. Not broken. Hardened. The lobby of Cole Enterprises gleamed under the weight of money. Glass walls, marble floors, designer furniture. It all felt cold and sterile, like everything inside had been wiped clean of anything human. Emily shuffled through the security gate, the receptionist's fake smile faltering as she caught sight of her. No appointment, no welcome. Just a long, disapproving glance before she was reluctantly buzzed through. The elevator ride stretched forever, her reflection staring back at her in the mirror-paneled walls. She tugged her sleeves down over her wrists, trying to hide the trembling in her hands. When the door slid open, Derek's assistant stood waiting, arms crossed tightly over a silk blouse. Without a word, she jerked her head toward the corner office. Emily pushed the door open. Derek Cole sat behind a sprawling mahogany desk, papers scattered around him like he was too important to tidy up. He didn't bother standing when he saw her. He leaned back in his leather chair, that familiar lazy smirk pulling at his mouth. Vanessa perched on the window ledge, legs crossed, phone in hand, pretending not to notice. "You shouldn't have. Come here," Derek said, voice dripping boredom. Emily stepped forward, lifting the packet of legal documents he had sent to her hospital bed. Her voice shook, but didn't break. "You think you can just erase me like this?" Derek laughed, a low, cruel sound that bounced off the glass and marble. He stood up, towering over her, his tailored jacket falling into perfect lines. "Erase you?" he said, walking slowly around the desk like a predator sizing up weak prey. "Emily, you were nothing before me. Nothing. Without me, you're just another girl in Dallas with nowhere to go." A few employees paused outside the glass walls of the office, pretending to study the floor tiles but really watching every word, every movement. Emily felt their eyes on her. Strangers' pity, curiosity, judgment. "You should be grateful," Derek continued, voice louder now, meant to be heard. "I gave you a life you could never have touched on your own. Now it's over. Go home. Do whatever. It is people like you do when they're left behind." Emily's throat burned with humiliation. She crumpled the papers slightly in her hand but didn't speak. Derek turned his back on her before she could even try. Vanessa smiled sweetly at Emily, a look of thin, victorious pity. Tears stung at the corners of Emily's eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. She dropped the papers on Derek's desk without another word and walked out. The glass walls made it impossible to hide. Heads turned. A receptionist whispered something to a colleague. Security guards at the elevator barely masked their smirks. She rode the elevator down in suffocating silence, holding her broken pride together with both hands. Outside, the city buzzed and gleamed under the mid-afternoon sun, oblivious to her. She wandered a few blocks aimlessly, letting the humiliation bleed off her skin with every step. When her phone buzzed, she almost didn't look. But the name flashing on the screen made her stop cold. Aaron Blake, her brother's best friend. Practically family once, before life scattered everyone in different directions. Emily hesitated, then answered. "Em?" Aaron's voice was warm, familiar, and edged with concern. "I heard what's happening. I'm so sorry. Listen, if you want to fight back, legally, I mean, I can help. No cost, no conditions. You don't have to do this alone." Emily gripped the phone tighter. For a moment, the possibility of relief, of rescue, flickered like a match in her chest. But it died just as fast. She shook her head even though he couldn't see her. "I can't, Aaron," she whispered hoarsely. "I'm tired. I'm not strong enough for this." She hung up before he could answer. Her fingers trembled as she slipped the phone back into her coat pocket. People walked past her without looking. The city moved on. As evening fell, Emily found herself in a small diner tucked between a pawn shop and a laundromat. The booths were cracked vinyl, and the smell of frying oil clung to the air. She slid into a corner seat and stared at the plastic menu without seeing it. A waitress in faded jeans and a stained apron brought her a grilled cheese sandwich and a coffee without asking. Emily muttered a thank you she wasn't sure was heard. She pulled the hospital envelope from her bag, along with the unsigned legal documents Derek had couriered. The pen felt heavy in her hand. Signing meant war. Signing meant she was willing to stand up, even if her knees shook the whole time. Her fingers hovered over the first signature line. A slow breath. A longer pause. Then, with a soft scratch against the paper, she signed her name. Across the diner, near the mop station, Luis wiped down a table. His uniform was different, but just as battered. He caught sight of her. The same girl from the restaurant, from the hospital. Their eyes met across the dull clatter and hum of the diner. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He just gave her a small, firm nod. A silent gesture that said, "I see you. I remember." Emily lowered her eyes back to the papers. She finished signing, her hand steadier now. Outside the cracked diner window, the neon lights flickered to life one by one, painting the street in broken colors. The war had begun, and this time, she wasn't walking away. The first real blow landed 2 weeks later, and this time, it wasn't Emily who stumbled. It was Derek. Early in the morning, long before the Dallas skyline had fully shaken off its winter haze, Aaron filed the lawsuit at the county courthouse. The documents were airtight, proof after proof tied to Derek's hidden offshore accounts, concealed properties, and undisclosed investments, all gathered neatly, all legally damning. By noon, a judge had signed the preliminary orders. Derek's personal and corporate assets were frozen, his accounts locked, his business dealings suspended pending a full investigation. It didn't take long for the media to catch wind. By the evening, local news anchors were flashing Derek's photo across the screens with bold, brutal captions. Dallas millionaire accused of abandoning pregnant wife amid hidden fortune scandal. Clips of Emily, grainy and blurred from outside the restaurant, reemerged. But this time the story wasn't mockery. It was outrage. Viewers called in. Social media exploded. Talk shows debated whether Derek Cole should face jail time for financial fraud alongside his moral failures. At Cole Enterprises, chaos rippled through every floor. Board members panicked. Investors called emergency meetings. Former business partners publicly announced reviews of ongoing associations. Derek stormed through his glass office like a trapped animal, barking orders, threatening lawsuits against anyone who dared breathe his name. But the tide had shifted, and no one wanted to drown with him. Vanessa Moore, once so smug perched beside him, scrambled desperately to distance herself. She wiped her Instagram clean overnight, deleting every post, every story that had once flaunted her relationship with Derek. The infamous "Cheers to Freedom" post vanished first, as if erasing the image could erase the stain. But screenshots had already spread across Twitter and Reddit like wildfire. Outside Derek's gated estate, cameras lined the sidewalks. Reporters shouted questions he refused to answer. Drones buzzed overhead. Protesters even showed up, signs in hand, chanting for justice for Emily. In a small corner of the internet, something quieter, but no less powerful, started growing. Luis, who had watched all of it unfold from the shadows, made a decision. Sitting at the cracked lunch table in the hospital staff room, he opened his phone, set up a GoFundMe page, and titled it simply, "Support for Emily Carter and her unborn child, He didn't write much, just a few honest lines. "She's fighting alone. Let's help her stand." He attached no viral marketing ploy, no staged photo. Just a blurry shot he had snapped weeks earlier of Emily outside the pharmacy, crumpled, but trying to stand. The donations started as a trickle. $10 here, $20 there. A nurse shared it. Then a local journalist picked it up during her coverage. By the end of the second day, the page had crossed $15,000. Emily didn't even know about it yet. She was too busy attending deposition meetings with Aaron, sitting through hours of testimony preparation. She wore the same scuffed flats every day, her hands steady, her eyes sharper than anyone remembered from before. She didn't speak much, but when she did, every word came out clear, deliberate, and sharp as broken glass. In the city's shiny restaurants where Derek once held court, his former friends now refused to return his calls. Invitations dried up, contracts disappeared. Vanessa, desperate to save her own social status, issued a tearful statement to the press claiming she had no knowledge of Mr. Cole's financial dealings and had ended all contact. Downtown, Luis watched Emily's story unfold on a cracked TV in the janitor's lounge. Other workers crowded around too, nodding quietly, murmuring soft curses at Derek's name. Someone passed around a donation can, slipping singles and coins inside without ceremony. Luis smiled to himself, but didn't say much. He just kept refreshing the GoFundMe page, watching the numbers climb steadily, knowing that for once, decency was winning, even if it was one small dollar at a time. Emily still hadn't walked into a courtroom yet. Her real war was just beginning. But for the first time in months, she wasn't fighting with just her own battered willpower. She had proof. She had allies she didn't even know existed. And somewhere out there, beyond the cold walls and whispered judgment, there was a city starting to remember what compassion looked like. And Derek Cole, for all his money, his suits, his sneers, was starting to learn what real isolation felt like. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs even before the judge entered. Every pew was packed, not just with legal teams, but with reporters clutching notepads, former business associates, and curious onlookers who had followed Emily Carter's story from viral clips to news headlines. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop journalists from whispering updates into their phones as the minutes ticked by. At the defendant's table, Derek Cole sat stiffly in an ill-fitted gray suit that looked like it had been thrown together last minute. His face was pale, jaw tight. Vanessa Moore sat beside him, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose despite the indoor lights, her foot tapping nervously against the floor. When the bailiff called the case, a hush fell over the room. Emily stood slowly, her hand resting lightly against her pregnant belly. Her frame was still delicate, but there was a solidness to her now, an unshakable weight behind her every step as she moved to the witness stand. She wore a simple navy dress, no flashy jewelry, no expensive fabrics, but somehow she carried more dignity in that one worn outfit than Derek and Vanessa combined. The judge, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, reviewed the stack of evidence before her. The offshore accounts, the hidden properties, the social media posts, the security footage from the restaurant, each piece laid out like heavy stones being built into an undeniable wall. Aaron approached the stand. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice steady. "Can you tell the court what happened the night you approached the Magnolia Grill?" Emily's voice was clear, but soft. She described how she had been left outside, how she knocked, how she had begged for water while Derek and Vanessa laughed inside. She spoke of the exhaustion, the fear, the betrayal. Every word hit the courtroom like a hammer. No theatrics, no tears, just the raw truth, unvarnished and real. Across the aisle, Derek shifted, uncomfortably in his seat. Vanessa leaned in, whispering frantically in his ear, but he shrugged her off, sweat shining on his forehead. Aaron handed the judge printed screenshots of Vanessa's deleted posts. The captions, the mocking emojis, the laughing faces. They were entered into evidence without objection. The judge flipped through the documents, her mouth tightening as she read. "Mr. Cole," she said finally, peering over her glasses, "it is the finding of this court that you knowingly attempted to defraud your spouse, engaged in financial misconduct, and abandoned your legal obligations while your wife was in a medically vulnerable state." Derek opened his mouth, as if to argue, but his lawyer placed a warning hand on his arm. It was over. Everyone could feel it. The judge continued, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "Effective immediately, all properties formerly in dispute, including the residence at Preston Hollow, 3 luxury vehicles, and the associated financial accounts, are awarded solely to Ms. Carter. Furthermore, Mr. Cole is ordered to pay compensatory damages for emotional distress and legal fees." A gasp rippled through the room. Emily closed her eyes for a brief moment, steadying herself. Aaron squeezed her shoulder lightly in silent congratulations. Vanessa ripped off her sunglasses and shot Derek a furious look. She shoved her chair back with a screech that made several people jump and stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clicking violently against the tile floor. Cameras swarmed her the moment she burst through the courthouse doors, but she pushed past them with her head ducked low, swatting microphones out of her way. Inside, Derek sat frozen, his world crumbling in slow motion. His friends, or at least the people who used to call themselves that, stared at him with thinly veiled disgust. No one moved to console him, no one even pretended. When the proceedings ended, the courtroom emptied like a draining river. Outside, a small crowd had gathered along the courthouse steps. As Derek exited, boos erupted from the onlookers. Someone shouted, "Coward!" Another yelled, "Shame on you!" Derek kept his head down, rushing toward a waiting car as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions he refused to answer. Emily followed minutes later, stepping into the sunlight with quiet grace. The reporters surged forward again, but this time they didn't shout accusations. They offered space, respect. Some even lowered their microphones, sensing the weight of the moment. Luis stood across the street, leaning against a parking meter. He didn't call out, didn't wave, but when Emily's eyes briefly met his, he tipped his cap with a small smile. She returned the smallest nod, a private acknowledgement of the few who had seen her when no one else did. The Dallas sun caught the edges of her hair as she walked steadily down the courthouse steps, carrying her unborn child and a future, finally her own. The morning sun spilled across the manicured lawns of a quiet Dallas neighborhood, casting long golden beams onto the driveway where a small moving truck was parked. Emily Carter stepped out, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. Her daughter, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, stirred lightly against her chest, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around Emily's necklace. Emily took a long, steady breath, soaking in the crisp air, the clean slate in front of her. The house was modest compared to the cold grandeur Derek once flaunted, but it was beautiful in all the ways that mattered. Warm, bright, alive. Friends, from the community, new ones who had come into her life through quiet kindness rather than status, helped unload boxes and furniture. The local paper had even sent a photographer, capturing a single quiet shot of Emily standing proudly. At the threshold, her newborn in her arms, the caption simple and strong. New beginnings. An hour later, a familiar figure pulled up in a battered white truck. Luis stepped out, holding a bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in brown paper. He had swapped his janitor uniform for a neat button-down shirt, his ID badge now reading Supervisor under his name. He looked a little nervous, shifting the flowers from one hand to the other as he approached. Emily smiled warmly when she saw him, shifting the baby slightly so she could extend a hand. Luis chuckled awkwardly, handing over the flowers. "For the real boss around here," he said, nodding toward the sleeping infant. Emily laughed, a soft sound that carried easily across the yard. "Thank you, Luis, for everything." He shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck. "Wasn't much, just didn't seem right to look away." There were no grand speeches, no dramatics, just two people standing under the Texas sun, connected by the quiet, stubborn humanity that had survived all the cruelty thrown against them. As the afternoon wore on, the doorbell rang again. This time, a formal letter waited on the porch. Emily opened it carefully, scanning the contents. Her eyebrows lifted, slightly in surprise. It was from Magnolia Grill, the very restaurant where Derek and Vanessa had once turned their backs on her. They were hosting a charity gala for a women's shelter and had invited Emily to be the keynote speaker. She reread the letter twice, the irony settling in slowly. Not long ago, she hadn't even been worth a glass of water to them. Now they wanted her voice, her story, her strength. That evening, Emily sat in her new living room, rocking her daughter gently as the last light faded from the windows. She thought about everything. The nights spent crying alone, the betrayals, the courtroom battles, the faces that had turned away when she needed them most. And she thought about the ones who hadn't. About Luis's silent kindness. About Aaron's steadfast help. About the strangers who had opened their wallets, their hearts. A soft breeze rustled the curtains. Emily kissed her daughter's forehead, her heart full in a way no mansion or luxury car had ever given her. She had lost everything that wasn't real, and gained everything that was. In a voiceover, quiet and steady, the words drifted over the closing scene. They left her begging for water. She built a life where no one would ever thirst for dignity again. As the screen faded to a warm sunset over the Dallas skyline, a final soft reminder floated up naturally. If Emily's journey inspired you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful real-life stories.